Hi, my name's Amy Gibbons and I'm a journalist at TES. In the video you're about to watch, I interview Julian Grenier, who's head of Sheringham Nursery School and Children's Centre in Newham, East London. And we have a great chat about his career so far and why he thinks the early years system in England deserves a lot more credit. So I hope you enjoy. Thinking of yourself and your own education, who was your most memorable teacher and why were they memorable to you?
Wow. Gosh.
Start off with.
What a great opening question. I think I have got that book, that Dr. Seuss book, All About Me, I think it's called, where as a child you kind of fill in information all about yourself. And I remember absolutely loving that as about a 7-year-old child, because I'd never had a kind of published book that you could write in, and it seemed like really transgressive to be allowed to write in this book. And it asked you to sort of do things like count up the number of stairs you have in your house and say what your favorite food was. And one of the questions in there was, who is your favorite teacher? And I put Mrs. Gape. Mm-hmm. So Mrs. Gape must have been my teacher at that age. And in my memory, the reason she was my favorite teacher was because we were kind of all given the opportunity to make a placemat as 7-year-olds, and we could put any design on it at all. And then I guess it must have been sent off to a company and turned into a kind of laminated and heat-proof placemat. So I did a chicken, not sure why really, but I did. And I remember just absolutely loving the idea that this drawing that I did as a 7-year-old then got turned into something kind of permanent. So it's one of my best school memories, I think, was that sense that, yeah, I suppose someone valued what we drew and did enough to sort of say it was going to be turned into something. And I kind of ate off that placemat for many years through my childhood. Sadly, I don't have it anymore though.
What age were you sort of when she was teaching?
So this was when I was a 7-year-old, and so, or six, it would have been 6 to 7, I think. So we did a lot of art, which actually in the rest of my school career, I didn't do very much art, and any art I did do was pretty terrible, to be totally frank. And I guess that's one of the reasons as a teacher now, I think it's really important to encourage and give children those wider opportunities, because it's very easy in your childhood just suddenly to get the idea that you're no good at something. Whereas actually probably I just needed a bit of encouragement and help at the right time. But I did a lot of art with her. I think I was allowed to stay in during play times, for example, and carry on doing things, which seemed incredibly special. And this was a private pre-prep school. And I went to prep school when I was 7. That was a day school. And that was a very academic day school, and with few happy memories or experiences. So I guess, again, it's probably looking back to the last bit of my education, which sort of would have looked roughly like a kind of typical English infant school experience before I went on to a kind of hothousing, very academic prep school, which I didn't enjoy going to at all. So I guess it's a memory of still being in that world where you know your art is as important as your sentences, is as important as your maths.
You mentioned how your experience in private school inspired you to deliver really amazing state education. Can you tell me a little bit more about why you chose education as a field? So not only how those experiences inspired you, but when you went on to choose your career, why it was education that you went for?
Yeah, so at university, my kind of main interest alongside my English degree was student journalism, and I did a lot of student journalism. In fact, it's a bit of a miracle that I ever got a degree, to be honest. So that was where my passion really lay. And I edited both the student paper and the student magazine too. really loved that, and wrote a little bit for the national press during that time. But also at the same time, I was involved in what was then called the Volunteer Reading Scheme, which put reading volunteers into primary schools. And I worked in a primary school on the edge of Oxford in, really quite a disadvantaged area, and realized both how tough it was for those kids, but also how much I enjoyed spending time with them and reading with them and encouraging them and seeing the progress they made. And I think there was really one day when I just kind of suddenly thought, this is actually what I really like doing, and this is what gives me a sense of personal fulfillment. I love doing this. I love being with kids. Whereas, student journalism was pretty cutthroat a lot of the time, and I could see the amount of kind of jostling that was needed to do well in it. And I didn't really have the confidence for that either at that time. Even though I'd done well in the student journalism field, I didn't quite have the confidence to take that on into a kind of career. So yeah, it kind of gradually dawned on me that that was what I'd most like to spend my time doing. So then I enrolled to do a PGCE, and things kind of flowed on from there. And then I did my PGCE at Oxford Polytechnic, as it was then, Oxford Brookes, as it is now. And I really remember my interview at Oxford Poly, the interviewing professor saying to me something like, well, you've just spent 3 years in an ivory tower, and you don't really know anything about what kind of life is like for most people. So why would you apply for this? And I kind of luckily had a good answer to it, which is I'd also spent 2 years working in an infant school that was one of the more disadvantaged infant schools, not just in Oxford, but in the country. And I was able to talk about that. But I understand where that question was coming from. But it always struck me as well that there was a kind of idea there that teaching wasn't a place for someone with kind of strong academic skills to go. There was almost a sense that that wasn't what it was about. And I think that's rather sad that that was a view that certainly was held when I was training to be a teacher in the late 1980s. And, there've been a lot of positive and a lot of negative developments in teacher education since. But I think one of the positives has been the sense you get now, which is that teaching is an appealing career for a whole range of graduates, including high achieving academic graduates. And I think that's a positive change for the sector.
What are you proudest of in your career so far? And is there anything that you regret? That's a tricky one.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's all right. I think what I'm proudest of is Sheringham Nursery School, where I'm head at the moment. First of all, I guess I'm just incredibly proud of the school, the nursery school, the team, all that we're doing, and take a lot of pride and strength from that every day. And I guess one of the highlights at Sheringham was being designated as a research school by the Education Endowment Foundation, and for a maintained nursery school to be designated as a research school, that was definitely a professional highlight for me. Regrets. Well, when I first started as a class teacher in Tower Hamlets in the early 90s, I was very persuaded by, it was really at the height of the reading wars, and I was very, very persuaded by the whole kind of real books approach and the apprenticeship approach to reading, and was in a school that adopted that 100%. And I'm afraid when I look back, my review of that time would tell me that there were lots and lots of children in my year 3 class who simply couldn't read and didn't have any way into reading. And I think that is something that I feel huge regret and shame about. And it's one of the reasons why it's been such a big part of the most recent part of my career has been around supporting children's early literacy, thinking about how in the early years we build all of the right foundations for children's literacy. Because without literacy, children are left without the skills that they need. It was a terrible thing that happened to those children in some inner London schools in the 1990s, and I was there and I was part of it.
I like the next question because it's slightly more lighthearted. It's
Okay.
a little creative. Who would be your colleagues in your perfect school staff room? I assume they don't mean this as like, you know, your ideal dinner and you know, you'd have, I don't know, Stephen Hawking or someone. I think it's probably more to do with the sort of types of people that are good to work with and yeah, what they might kind of bring to a perfect staff room. What do you think?
Yeah, what an interesting idea. And I guess my first decision would have to be, what sort of school am I creating a staff room for? So I guess if it was a maintained nursery school and a children's centre, the people who here are some of the people who I continue to admire and would definitely have with me there. So I would definitely have Laura Henry, who I think is a really inspiring early years speaker and consultant and leader, and has done an incredible job to engage with parents and children, and her kind of absolute commitment to quality and the importance of childcare. So I would really like to have Laura. I would, I think, like to have Margie Wally, who for many years headed Pen Green Centre in Corby, and I studied with the Pen Green team to get my MA in integrated early childhood education and care. So I definitely would want Margie to be there. I think my former deputy Michelle Barrett, who now heads up Vanessa Nursery School in Hammersmith and Fulham. I think I'd quite like to have Michelle back, because we didn't really work together for all of that long before I left to take up a job working for Tower Hamlets. So I think I'd like to have a bit more time working with Michelle. I think I'd like to have Jan de Biel there. I've really enjoyed working with Jan over recent years, and I find him very thought-provoking and constantly querying and questioning things from I think absolutely the right place. I guess in fairness, I'd really like the Sheringham team to be there with me, because there isn't anyone I wouldn't like to keep on board from our team. And then I guess the person I'm going to add now is Cassie Buchanan, head of Charles Dickens Primary School, who I got to know through the Research School Network, and I really admire Cassie and her work hugely, and would like to have that opportunity to learn from a lot of what she's done and to learn with her. So Amy, I'm adding one more person to my school staff team, which is Iram Siraj. So sorry to kind of suddenly expand the team by one, but it would definitely have to be Iram, who I was lucky enough to come across back in the late 1990s when I was working in Haringey in London, and she is really one of the people that has really helped my learning and understanding of early years so much. And with her background as an early years teacher, I would definitely like to have Iram with me too.
Oh, wonderful. It sounds like a great staff room to me. Who makes the tea?
Me, probably,
Yeah,
but it'll be coffee. It'll be
oh, it'll
coffee.
be coffee. All right then. Okay. Don't know. Yeah, I think I'd have to have my own pot of tea then if I was visiting. Okay, so we've had the staff room. This one back into sort of policy again. What do you think are the best and the worst aspects of our school system? I know obviously you're nursery focused, so we can look at early years, but you can talk overall as well if you've got sort of thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think that the worst aspect of our school system is definitely the long-standing problem of how close the correlation is between being a disadvantaged child and not doing well in school. So in England, you know, how well off your parents are significantly predicts how well you're going to do at school. And I know there are lots of individual exceptions, but that's the big picture. And half of my family is from Canada. My mum is Canadian and my brother lives in Canada. And it's always really thought-provoking for me to think about how much better Canada does on this front than England. So in Canada, children's life chances are incredibly equal. The school system in Canada and the whole approach to life in Canada really does, to a much greater extent than in this country, give every child a fair chance of success. And it's one of the things I admire about the Canadian system. So that for me is definitely the worst aspect. I think that we can be really proud of a lot of aspects of our early years education in this country. I think that we underrate how good early education is in England all of the time, and we forget that people around the world come to see what we do and how we do it so well. And we're lucky enough to host, it's not an exaggeration to say in obviously the pre-COVID era, hundreds of overseas visitors who come to Sheringham Nursery School to see that traditional English early years practice around play and using the outdoors and all of the ways that the staff interact with the children and help their learning, and the way that parents are so welcome. These are real strengths of the English early years system that are admired around the world. And I think we undersell ourselves too often.
So on to the next question. So this is an interesting one. Your own teachers aside, who in education has influenced you the most? You've touched on some people actually that you've worked with who you say have been very influential. You may choose one of them, you may choose someone completely different, up to you.
Yeah, I think I might say Kevin Collins at this point. So when I worked as early years advisor for Tower Hamlets, Kevin was the chief executive of the council, but prior to that, he'd been in charge of services for children and young people, including schools. Mm-hmm. And of course, he then went on to head up the Education Endowment Foundation. And I think that Tower Hamlets was very much a team effort. And I know Kevin himself would say that there are thousands of people who contributed to really the incredible transformation of life chances for kids in Tower Hamlets, to the extent that when I had my first teaching job, which was in Tower Hamlets, the schools there were some of the lowest performing schools in the country. Outcomes for children in Tower Hamlets were pretty much the lowest in the country. Children of Bangladeshi heritage were one of the lowest performing ethnic groups in the country and made up a large proportion of kids in Tower Hamlets. And through the efforts of hundreds and thousands of people, in fact, professionals of all sorts, and the parents and community leaders in Tower Hamlets, we found ourselves in this extraordinary place where children in Tower Hamlets now do better than the average child in England in their education, where Bangladeshi children as a cohort are doing really well in our school system. And I think that's because of several qualities which Kevin Collins was able really to kind of galvanize, which was, first of all, to get a whole range of different people to come together and to talk about their shared vision for children. So, for example, everyone from the trade union groups in Tower Hamlets who are very strong in the schools through to all of the different people that work with youngsters and children and families and community leaders and faith groups and all of those people. And it was about having that shared commitment to do our very best for the children. And I think he brought people together really well and listened to people and got people to sign up to a common approach and a common set of ambitions. And then he was very, very relentless that we were going to deliver those great things for children in Tower Hamlets. And I think that the story of education in the East London boroughs like Tower Hamlets and Newham, where I am now, is again something that that we should be really proud of in this country. And we get people, as I said, visiting from all around the world to look at what it is we've done in Newham and what it is we've done in Tower Hamlets, which has enabled children to thrive and do so well in school. So Kevin would get my vote, but Kevin himself, I know, would acknowledge that thousands of people were involved in that work.
If you became Education Secretary tomorrow, what would be the first thing that you would do?
I would get people together to talk about the challenge and to find that common ground and to produce that shared sense of what it is we're trying to do for children and families at this very difficult time, and then have that really can-do attitude around getting all parts of the system to pull together. I've just read Andrew Adonis's biography of Bevan, and it's incredible to read about how Bevan used his skills as a trade unionist before the war, so that when Churchill really called on him to galvanize the war effort, Bevan really understood how to get people around the table to thrash out grievances and disagreements and then kind of come up with a plan. And Bevan always said that he had the back of working people and they trusted him when he led them. So you know, I'm an ant compared to him as a giant, but that's who I would draw my inspiration from, and that Churchillian motto of action this day. I think Bevan delivered that in the factories and the workplaces around the country in an incredible way, and that's what I would seek to do if the fairy waved her wand and put me in that position, which I really hope for the sake of the country doesn't happen, by the way.
So penultimate question for you. So I suppose slipping quite far ahead now, and it is difficult because obviously things change so quickly, both in education but in wider society these days with technology progressing so quickly. What do you think our schools will be like in 30 years from now?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I would like to think that in 30 years' time, I guess to talk about the bit of the system I know best, that we'll have sorted out funding for the early years so that there is a proper level playing field and high level of funding across the board for everywhere that is offering early education and care. That it would be a graduate-led and mostly graduate workforce, and that we would have sorted out many of the problems we have with qualifications. I think the entitlement to parents would be much greater, so that it would be much more of a Scandinavian approach where early education and childcare is really part of the universal welfare state that absolutely everyone can access. It's not something that is primarily about who can afford to pay fees if you've got a small child. I think that we have really neglected children's health in the early years for far too many years. So in 30 years' time, I would like to see that all of those children are going into an early years setting where there's ample space for outdoor play and a real focus on physical development and movement and health more generally, and that there are health professionals embedded in that organisation, that organisation is a very community focused and driven place where parents are in and out, and that it's about developing the local community and listening to parents and working with parents. And those are the sorts of things that would begin to deliver in a real way that notion of giving all children a fair start to life, so that you wouldn't have some children in the early years missing out on so much that other families take for granted. So that's what I would like to see if I wandered into early years setting in 3 decades time.
Last question for you, Julian, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I like this one. So what one person do you think has made the most difference to our schools in the past 12 months? Now that's tricky given that we've had quite an extraordinary past 12 months. Can you think of one person that you think has had an influence more than, I suppose, with the pandemic as a backdrop?
That's such a good question. Who do I think? I might put Ed Venker in this place, and the reason I would say that about Ed is, first of all, because of the incredible work that the team at Reach Academy Feltham have done, and their great commitment to community development, to equal life chances for all children. Their strong focus on the early years is really admirable. And of course, Reach Feltham were kind of in a big way as well behind Oak Academy and the whole approach to trying to create all of those online lessons to support the system during this very difficult period. And of course, people have criticised Oak, and actually some of the earlier stuff is undoubtedly problematic. But I think if we look at the big picture, that is an astonishing achievement to get that all pulled together so quickly and accessed by so many people. And that's another reason why I would point to Ed for the inspiration, I guess, and his can-do attitude and all that he's done